Family-owned businesses are an essential element of the American economy, and they're often the best choice for today's consumers. I've always been fascinated by how family businesses do what they do. From one generation to the next, how does family-owned business succession occur? I'm Bill Evans, president and the second generation of a three-generation family-owned glass company based in Nashville, Tennessee. And now, I'm talking with fellow family business owners and hearing their advice, insights, and opinions about generational succession. This is Generation to Generation, building a family business. Today, I'm speaking with David Stansell, Stansell Electric, its CEO and third generation of a three-generation company. Hi, David. Thanks for letting us intrude on your day.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks for having me.
So we're here to talk about generational succession planning. Why don't you give us a brief background on your company?
Well, Stansell Electric is an interesting company. It was started in 1940 by my grandfather. And, at that first, he was just in his garage. I think the story is he borrowed money from his wife, which I think is a funny way to say that, the way that went down. But he was doing work supporting the war and people he knew around town from his prior relationships, but he was successful enough that he needed more help pretty quickly, and so he ended up hiring his two brothers to come work with him and immediately gave each of them a third ownership in the business. So he created second generation problems in a first generation business right out of the gate. I guess over time my dad came into the business and through a set of circumstances, and then later I came in, but the company's grown and then we are where we are today.
Now, do you have cousins from your great uncles that are involved?
So interesting, there were other family members that had worked in the business, but no offspring of my grandfather's brothers ended up staying in the business. There was one that I remember being there when I was a kid. I remember when I was a kid and working summer jobs, I worked with a cousin, but by the time I got here, they were all out of the business. So the smartest brother of my grandfather, as soon as he was able, he retired, sold his interest in the business back to the business, and bought an RV and traveled. So I call him the smart one. But my grandfather and his the other brother were still there. They had an interesting setup. They had one office with two desks pushed together. That's the way they always ran the business. And they would, talk to each other and work things out. And as time went on, my dad came into the business. My grandfather gave half of his ownership to my dad. So then my great uncle owned half the business, and my grandfather owned half, and my dad owned half. So that was that kind of second generation kind of problem that they had right there at that critical moment.
So your dad owned half of your grandfather's stock.
Right, so 25% and 25% and 50% still with the great uncle, who was at that time no longer actually working in the business.
So what happened to the great uncle's shares?
Well, it was a problem. Now, I think the way they had it set up is because from the initial, my grandfather set it up where he had a tie-breaking vote. So when you have a 50-50 basically with those two, but it was not a good time. I think my dad would be interesting to talk to him about that time frame. I remember it being very stressful for him, and he would talk about it at home. But at some point, my great uncle said, I should just sell this to you all. And I think the next day, my dad had a proposal on his available for him. So they ended up buying him out. And so then it was back to the two of them, and then it transitioned after that.
So your dad then owned 100% of the business at one time?
My grandfather still owned his 25%. My dad still owned his 25%. And as they were doing this starting to do this transaction, when they talked to an attorney, I think they realized, wait a minute, I'm just creating an estate problem. My grandfather didn't want to have any back because he's thinking about himself, and my dad kind of realized, wait a minute, this isn't going to work for me either. So they set it up where they had two classes of stock, and they took what had been my great uncle's ownership interest and gave it to my brother and sister and me and my mom and so forth, just to get it to somebody else, but in a way that would be, I guess, a better estate planning setup. But of course, that just created a problem for my brother and I later when you got non-working family members with ownership.
So you and your brother are active in the business. So how did the transition occur from your father to you and your brother?
My brother and I wondered how that would go. So we already had some ownership interest, and I think the first thing we did was clean up the other people that were non-working family members. So when I got here, I told you my sister worked here. Her performance increased quite a bit after I got here, but then it declined. And to the point that the person that she worked for kind of came to me and said, this isn't working. I can't make this work. And I had to ask my dad to terminate my sister because I didn't think it was fair to make me do it. So that was a tough family business reality that we had to face. So, and my grandfather passed away the day before his 92nd birthday, so that was kind of a milestone. But as far as ownership, my brother and I wondered how that would happen and talked about it, but my dad kind of had his own idea about how to do that, and he wanted to give it to us. So that's what he started working on doing. I feel like we bought him out, but really he did that just by taking distributions, which were his to take. It's his company, so he could do that. And he built it to what it was at that time, so I thought it was totally reasonable. But after a few years, you kind of wonder, how long are you going to be doing this? If you know what I mean, because after I'd been here a while and my brother had been here a while and the company was growing and we're doing some things differently, that we're having some success, building on a great foundation, no doubt. But you kind of wonder, how long is he going to be taking all of that benefit? And we wanted to kind of leave some in the company to grow more. So anyway, but it worked out. We kind of came to an agreement, and he was giving us the company, so we couldn't complain about that. But that's how it went between that generation. So it's a little bit different than the previous.
So you don't currently have fourth generation family members in the business.
That's right.
What's your plan from here on?
The company has grown. We have, over 300 employees and $100 million of revenue, quite a bit bigger than we were before. And one of the things we did during the difficult time that I discussed with my brother was we added an advisory board that had outside, non-family, non-owner members on it. And this issue of succession they felt like the most important issue for us to work on, for them to help us with. And based on their recommendations and their work, we've actually already sold 10% of the company to the senior leadership of the company. So there's other people that are involved in senior leadership. The president owns a piece, and then the other senior leaders also. So that was the first step we did, not necessarily as the end all, but it's a start. So that's what we did first. And we've done that, and we've subsequently let in. These people bought their shares from us, so we didn't give it to them, so that's a difference. But we've let another person buy in as well. So, our interest is slightly less, but we still know we need to solve the overall succession problem. And we've been spending a lot of time on that lately. At some point you realize, you're not going to live forever. My children are, two of them are out of college, but still quite young. My brother's kids are not even in college yet, so it's too far for them to consider if they would ever want to or be appropriate to be in the company. Also, the size of the company is such that, the likelihood that the right person to lead the business would be one of our children is much lower. So the professionalization of the business we think is important, and that's why we let that's why we have our senior leadership as owners now as well. So who's to say whether any of those kids will ever be in the business, but that's not our number one plan right now.
So your dad's transition to you and your brother was much more relaxed. He gifted you the stock in exchange for receiving dividends over some period of time, where you're being more proactive about planning for the future.
Yes, that's a big difference. My dad always wanted his children to come into the business, and that was what he had in his mind. I'm not sure that was talked about as much or planned for as much, and he always wanted to know from me. I remember clearly when I was doing the business in Virginia, he's like, "Are you ever going to come back into this business or not? Are you ever going to do this? I need to know. I need to plan." And I'm like, I don't know. And what I told him was, this is from a business standpoint, I asked him, what should the business do differently if I am going to come in or if it's going to be somebody else? Because in my view, the right thing for the business should be the same either way. So that was kind of my counsel to him, and that's what we've continued to try to do, is what's the best thing for the business? Because if the business is the golden goose, you really want to protect the golden goose and do what's best for it, and you can figure out the other. So that's the approach we took, but ultimately, of course, we did come into the business, and so that's where we are.
I get so excited listening to generational stories, and I suspect we're all similar in many aspects, how we deal with family and how we deal with succession. And my dad was much more laid back, gifting stock in exchange for keeping him on the payroll. Does this sound familiar?
Yes.
And now my sister and I are being more proactive and more formal in the planning.
That's probably, I think that's better, of course, but there are a lot of variables, and people are so different, and their views on things are different. And how can you, in a family business, how can you address and do what's best for the business and address all those concerns and differing viewpoints, while at the same time preserving the ability to go to Thanksgiving together?
It's hard to leave the business alone, especially with outside family members that aren't involved in the business. Hey, how's business? Oh, really? You got to ask today?
Yeah, and it's always at Thanksgiving or something like that. That is one of my wife's pet peeves, is talking about business at family events.
I'm on her side, but it's hard to stay out of the loop. What advice would you give on generational succession planning and family business?
That's a really good question, and I think I'm uncomfortable giving advice, but what I think is useful is for me to share our experiences, and others can take from that and use what's useful. I know that one of the most useful things for us was adding the advisory board with outside members. I think that was a key thing to help us get unstuck from where we were. So that would be something that was for us very valuable. And I think that another thing that they helped us do was start thinking about it much earlier than I think we would have. It was always something we would worry about in 5 years or in 10 years, but years would go by and we would be, let's worry about that in 5 years or 10 years, and you never do anything. And they kind of held our feet to the fire and said, no, we need to start working on this now. So I think starting early, and I think having some outside assistance are probably the things that made the biggest difference for us.
David, I want to thank you for spending time with us. This has been terrific.
Yes,
and
my
good
pleasure.
luck into the future.
Thank you, Bill.
To learn more about Stansell Electric, our story, or to watch more generation-to-generation interviews, just click on the links.